Hey, and welcome back to StyleCraft. I'm Cameron, and we are talking about depth. And for this final lesson on depth for this week, I want to show you how to create something like this. And in this example, it's 2.5D. It's using a 2.5D camera. It's using layers of photos that are stacked back in Z space. It's using a little bit of typography, some extra textures over in here. It's also using texture as an atmospheric element, and it's also using a um, piece of footage called large beam dust that we used last week with atmosphere. It's from the same collection that you probably downloaded last week as well. So it's a fairly simple project. You can see there's only a few layers going on here, but the end result's pretty cool. So I want to show you how to go about creating depth with 2.5D in this example. So let's start by creating a new composition, and we'll make this 1920 by 1080, 120 frames, and we'll call this depth comp 2. And the first thing I did was I brought in some photographs I had downloaded off the internet that are Creative Commons photographs, and they are free to use, and you don't have to credit anyone. So the first thing I did was I brought in an image like so, and I just decided to create some type of simple uh, layout. Okay, and there's different ways you can create layouts. I just thought, that I would do something very straightforward and basic, which ended up being something along the lines of this, where there's a tall image and a shorter image. And maybe I'll add in one additional image up in here. And we'll make it slightly bigger. Something like so. Actually, I'm going to delete that one. I'm going to create, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pre-comp this. Select both layers, right click, pre-compose, or go to layer, pre-compose. And we'll call this photo comp 1. And then we'll bring in this image. And we'll make this, we'll pre-compose this one as well, and we'll call this photo comp 2. And we'll make both of these layers 3D, and we'll add a new camera. And we'll make this a one node camera, 35 millimeters. Actually, let's change it up a little bit. Let's go 50 millimeters, a little bit longer lens. Depth of field is on. And we'll go ahead and turn photo comp 2 off. And the trick to this is I started playing around with my rotation settings. So I immediately went to the Y, rotated over, hit C on my keyboard, brought it back into view here. And I think I did a little bit of X, something like so. Zoomed out a little bit. I did it this way so that my layers are always flat, right? So I could easily duplicate this layer, take the one behind it and drag it back on Z. If I'll go to 2 views here, and you'll see that. Change this to custom. You can see I just drug the second one back in Z. I'll take photo comp 2. Maybe I'll put photo comp 2 in the middle, and I'll scale it down. Trial and error here, trial and error. So back in this one, I'll turn the camera back on. And I don't love how it's kind of so far back. So maybe it's just a slight X rotation, 5 degrees. Bring it back, maybe pull it back a little bit more. And this is all I do when I do 2.5D. I just start positioning layers back in space, and I usually have 2 viewports up, and I'm looking through my camera here and then moving layers around here. A lot of times I like to work in custom view one, also I like to work from the top view so I can see like this. And to be totally honest with you, a lot of times I get very, I like numbers to be exact a lot of times. So maybe I'll make this 500. I'll make this 1,000. So I know that there are 500 pixels back for this guy and then another 500 pixels back for this guy. Maybe I'll move this guy up slightly. I like him to be offset. So maybe I move him up to 250, something like so. I'll go back to one view and I'm going to play around just a little bit more with this. Trial and error. Oh, something like that. And then how I got the movement was I actually just clicked on, option clicked on position, and I did my wiggle expression. And I think I did 0.5 and 100. And that gave me this very simple but interesting kind of camera shake move going on. Yeah, it's just enough to, add some interest to it. Maybe I'll change it from 0.1 to 1, 0.5 to 1. And then also, I roughly want this to be in focus. So I'll go back to my two views, and I know that that layer is this guy right here. And I will hit AA on the keyboard and pull up my focus distance. And this is a long lens, so that's why my camera is really far back. I'm going to crank the aperture way up, something like so. And reposition this on the X so that Abe is a little bit more in focus, like so. Yeah, it works for me. And then I'm going to duplicate this guy, bring him forward, maybe somewhere over in here, just to give a foreground element to this. That's we don't have to necessarily know what this is. It's just giving it some added depth. And then I think I also used, I used this writing right here. And really quickly, I'll just go and make a background layer. We'll call it background. Bring it to the back. I'm going to lock that layer. And I do this because now I can take this writing and I can actually set it to something like multiply. And there it is. Maybe though, actually, I would like to go to channel, invert, and make that type white. And because of that, I can go back to screen now. Yeah, that's a little bit more interesting. And so with this type, I'm going to make it 3D as well. And maybe positioning it somewhere. I kind of like it as a nice little foreground element right here. So now I'm going to go back to my custom view. I'm going to position it down just slightly. And then I'm going to go into my levels effect under color correction. And what I want to do here is I want to make this gray value more black. It's like that so that it blends in more with the background. So all I did was just bring the blacks. I crunched them in. Maybe I'll bring the gray values up just slightly. Something like so. Okay, so I also used a couple textures here. One of them was this chalkboard, like so. I made it 3D, and I think I used it in the foreground in my original example, but maybe I'll push it back into the background for this example. Not sure yet. I'm also going to bring in this texture right here. Maybe I'll try the same thing here. Make it 3D. Yeah, that's interesting. Scale it up. Kind of move it over on the x-axis here. Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to change the transparency of all these photo comps to something like 85%, so they're just a little bit transparent. Yeah, that's cool. And then I'm going to bring this guy back into the foreground here. And then I said that I also used this dust footage, and that's what this guy is right here. So I'm going to make it 3D as well. Maybe scale it down slightly, or maybe scale it up a little bit here. And then we're going to set this to, let's try screen. Or maybe we'll try add. Yeah, and I'm not liking how this texture is looking either, so I'm going to actually pull it back. Oh, that's the type. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to try and reposition this chalkboard again to make it work with our image here. That's looking a little bit better. This is what I love to do when I'm playing around with 2.5D. I like to reposition layers and just play around with them. I also added some type here. I think I said history. Made that layer 3D. And you'll notice here that the history layer is not fully white. It's like this greenish white, because what I did here is I selected a color from my palette. Something, maybe actually we'll go a little bit more white here. Maybe a nice light gray. Something like so. Add a new adjustment layer. And for this, we're going to use an effect we haven't used yet, I don't believe. It's under Stylize. It's called S Film Effect. It really helps to bring things together. Load a preset here, and there's one I found. There's actually a few I found that I really liked. But subtle innuendo is the one I actually went with, which we'll click here. Now, the one thing I don't like immediately is this image looks really out of place with these images. And I think that's because these images are black and white. Yeah. So the easy fix to this is effect, color correction, black and white. We could go in, you can see that this is definitely more contrasty than this. We could adjust things to make it less contrasty, like the reds, the yellows. It's actually, now it's a little bit too bright. I don't know, something like so. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it already blends in better. And then maybe I'll bring history forward just slightly so it's offset. We can read it just a little differently. Actually, let's pull it right here. And we're going to move this comp. We're going to move this guy up. Like so. And actually, let me show you a trick here. If I make these layers 3D here, I can actually push one of them further back or pull them further in space and go back into my comp. And if I collapse transformations on this comp, which is right here, it's going to respect the 3D space of that photo. So you see how this box all of a sudden became 3-dimensional? Without, it's just a flat box. But because there's a 3D layer inside of this, if I collapse transformations, it recognizes that and puts this layer where it's supposed to be in 3D space. Now, if I wanted to adjust this easily, I could go up here to new comp viewer, jump back into this comp. I could play around with my settings here, my position. That's actually a little bit more interesting. And then I'll just readjust history. Something like that. And close this one out. And let's make sure that we can see this guy right here. Yeah, I can tell that that's way too big. Maybe we'll rotate it on the Y 180 degrees so that it's over in here. Yeah, that looks interesting. Preview this and see what it looks like. Here's the preview. It's looking pretty good. There's a lot of depth going on here, a lot of parallaxing. I could use some of the scripty words maybe back in here in the back. Out of focus. History feels too crystal clear. So those are the two things I immediately see I want to change up. So let me duplicate the writing. Go back into my two views here. Drag it back and over. And you can see here the problem is it's behind the chalkboard texture here. So if I change the chalkboard to something like overlay, let's see what that does. Well, that makes it really dark back there, but it's kind of interesting. Screen. So that's screen and that's normal. Screen. Yeah, so we lost some of our imagery back there, which we now got back, which I didn't even notice that before. So that's cool. So we'll go back into that texture. Maybe bring it back in here somewhere. We'll scale it down. It's much too large. I'm going to rotate it. Try -90. I don't like, let's try this. Yeah, I don't like now how you can really see the edges of it. Yeah, there we go. So just messing with the gray values, got rid of some of that. Now it's really difficult to read history, so we need to reposition history. Maybe it's somewhere over here. Yeah, it's a little more out of focus now, which makes it look a little nicer. And just for the hell of it, I want to try and add a glow. Glows always work pretty well with comps like this. So maybe we'll add it before the film effect. After. Let's go back to after. We'll turn up the threshold so not everything is glowing. And maybe we'll widen it out a bit. And turn down the glow just a little bit. So this is before, after, very subtle. Bringing them just a little bit more. Before, after. I'm good with that. And then just add a little bit of chroma warp. We'll load this preset and we'll make it subtle just to give it a little bit of realism, which is why I use this plugin, because it does add that little bit of just imperfectness to it and makes it look a little bit more real. In fact, that feels like it's just a little bit too much. So if I take it from 0.97 to 0.98, very subtle, but I like it. Okay, let's preview this. So there's a short little preview of it. It looks pretty awesome. Couple things I want to change really quickly is I think I want to turn down the amount of depth of field, I'm sorry. It's 934, maybe let's try 450. Let's just shut it off for a second. So that's interesting, but it's really dirty, which is this texture, I believe, right here. Yeah. So if we turn that texture off and then turn depth of field back on, yeah, it's a little more clean at this point. I think that texture was just making it, yeah, really dirty for my taste. So maybe we could duplicate the chalkboard, actually. Bring it forward in space. So it's kind of like a texture that sits over the top of everything. And change it from screen to maybe lighten. And turn it off, on, off, on. Very subtle texture. I like it though. Multiply, let's see what this looks like. So we did multiply and we did a channel invert to make the black white and the white black. Darkens it up a bit. I think I actually prefer screen without invert. I take that back, I don't. Okay, and let's try it without, without. So we'll crank this back up to, let's go in the middle, 650. Maybe 700. And I want to try just one more film effect. See how it looks with a slightly different look. And I have one in mind, which is up here somewhere. That one right there. Let's try and load that up and we'll compare the two of them. So this is the new one. And this is the old one. New, old. Definitely like the old one. Okay, so one more thing I want to do here is I want to bring this guy forward even more. I want to see more of this dust going on here. So I'm going to duplicate the layer, maybe bring it forward just a bit, over a bit, something like that. And I'm actually going to bring in one more piece of footage here. Subtle dust. It was in one of the packs you downloaded for Atmosphere. And let's just put this in here, drop it in. How about, let's try screen. So with, without. Actually, let's replace this with a swirly dust. That's the other one that came with it. And let's see what that one looks like. If it's a little bit more. Yeah, it's a little bit more dust. Actually, it's too much dust. Bring it below that. Cool. Okay, I want to add another adjustment layer here. And I want to do something with the flicker. So let's add a little bit of flicker. I think that'll be really interesting. It wasn't in the original example, but sometimes flicker can be pretty interesting to add, especially for stuff that's a little bit older like this. Yeah, see that campfire's got a nice look to it. That's too much. Outlight might be kind of cool. So I'm going to say it's between campfire and outlight, which I do like campfire. It's a little bit slower. And we will turn down the amplitude or the random frequency to maybe 5. And let's preview this. And there we go. There's the flicker added. There's the 2.5D. There's the depth. There's the camera blur. There's the atmospheric depth. Overall, it looks really awesome, in my opinion. So I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. Hope you learned something new. Leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Until next time, I'm Cameron, and this is Motion Science.